December 7th, 1941, 7:55 a.m. A Japanese torpedo tears through the hull of USS West Virginia at 40 feet per second. Then another. 7 torpedoes in under 4 minutes, each one carrying 1,000 pounds of high explosive detonating against American steel. The ship doesn't just flood. She screams. Metal buckles inward like crumpled paper. Compartments collapse. Fire erupts across the water's surface as fuel oil ignites. Men are vaporized, drowned, crushed, and burned in the same 60 seconds. By 8:30 a.m. USS West Virginia sits on the bottom of Pearl Harbor. Dead. Finished. Gone. Tokyo celebrates. Japanese Imperial Headquarters receives reconnaissance photographs within 24 hours. 8 American battleships destroyed or crippled. The Pacific Fleet is finished. Naval analysts in Tokyo calculate the recovery timeline 18 months minimum, possibly 5 years, possibly never. Admiral Yamamoto's gamble has paid off. America's ability to wage war in the Pacific has been surgically removed. There is only one problem with this calculation. They didn't know about a naval architect from Massachusetts named Homer Wallin, and they didn't know that Pearl Harbor was only 40 feet deep. Before we go further, if you love stories about impossible odds, human determination and engineering that changed history, hit that subscribe button right now and ring the bell. Every week we bring you military history that goes deeper than the headlines, the secret decisions, the unknown heroes, the moments that actually turned the war. You don't want to miss what's coming. Now let's get back to the most remarkable salvage operation in the history of naval warfare. Here are the numbers the Japanese never imagined possible. 21 American ships damaged or sunk on December 7, 1941. 5 months later, 18 of them are either back in active service or under intensive repair. Nevada refloated in 67 days. California raised from the harbor mud and sent to Puget Sound for reconstruction. And West Virginia, the most savagely damaged battleship in American history, pulled back from the dead and eventually given weapon systems so advanced she could destroy Japanese warships in total darkness from 20 miles away. The enemy calculated Pearl Harbor as a permanent catastrophe. It turned out to be a temporary inconvenience. This is the story of how that happened. And it starts not with admirals or politicians, but with one engineer standing on a flagship's deck on the morning of the attack, watching the destruction with a mind already running calculations. December 7, 1941 begins as a quiet Sunday at Pearl Harbor Naval Station territory of Hawaii. Most of the fleet has been in port since Friday. Battleship Row holds 8 of America's most powerful warships moored in pairs along Ford Island's eastern shore. Sailors are eating breakfast. Some are still sleeping. The 7:55 a.m. air raid alarm sounds 14 seconds before the first Japanese aircraft drops its first weapon, which means it is essentially useless. There is no warning. There is only fire. The first wave of 183 Japanese aircraft strikes with practiced precision. Torpedo bombers skim the harbor surface at altitudes so low their wingtips nearly touch the water. High-level bombers using converted 16-inch naval shells as their weapons fall toward deck armor from altitude. Fighter escorts sweep the airfield at Hickam and Wheeler, destroying American aircraft before they can respond. The coordination is nearly perfect. The execution is nearly flawless. Arizona takes a bomb directly into her forward ammunition magazine. The resulting explosion is not a sinking. It is an erasure. 1,177 men die in the same instant the magazine detonates. The ship doesn't sink so much as cease to exist as a coherent structure. Oklahoma absorbs 5 torpedoes in rapid succession, rolls completely upside down, and traps 429 living men inside her overturned hull. West Virginia takes 7 torpedoes along her port side and 2 armor-piercing bomb hits. California receives 2 torpedoes and 2 bombs, and slowly settles into the mud. Nevada, the only battleship to get her engines running during the attack, takes 1 torpedo forward and 6 bomb hits before her crew deliberately runs her aground at Hospital Point to prevent her from sinking and blocking the harbor entrance. By the time the second wave of Japanese aircraft arrives at 8:40 a.m. and finishes its work, the arithmetic of destruction is nearly total. 2,403 Americans are dead. 21 ships are damaged or sunk. 188 aircraft are destroyed on the ground. The tactical execution of the attack is so precise, so overwhelming, so total, that Japanese naval planners believe they have fundamentally altered the strategic balance of the Pacific War for years to come. They are examining the surface. They are not calculating what lies beneath it. Because here is what Japanese reconnaissance photographs cannot show. Pearl Harbor's average depth is 40 feet. Oklahoma capsized in 33 feet of water. West Virginia settled upright in similar depth. California rested in the mud at comparable shallowness. When warships sink in the open ocean, they disappear into hundreds or thousands of feet of water utterly beyond the reach of any salvage technology that exists or will exist for decades. But 40 feet means divers can work. 40 feet means patches can be installed against torn hull plating. 40 feet means pumps can remove water faster than it floods back in. The Japanese Imperial Navy had studied American warships and American harbors and American industrial capacity. They had not studied Pearl Harbor's bathymetry. They sent battleships to the bottom of a puddle and called it a permanent victory. Standing on the deck of the fleet flagship on the morning of December 7th, watching Arizona burn and Oklahoma capsize, Captain Homer Wallin is not calculating grief. He is calculating cofferdam sizes. Wallin is 50 years old in December 1941. He is not a combat officer. He has never commanded a ship in battle. He has never led men into enemy fire. His entire career, 20 years of it, has been spent in the unglamorous corridors of naval architecture, ship construction, and damage control engineering. MYT trained meticulous and possessed of a technical imagination that operates in 3 dimensions, where most engineers see only 2. Wallin has spent 2 decades working the shipyards at New York, Philadelphia, and Mare Island. He understands how ships are built. More importantly, he understands how they break apart and what it takes to put them back together. On December 7, 1941, Wallin holds the position of Battle Force Engineer aboard the Pacific Fleet flagship. He watches the attack unfold with the particular horror of a man who understands exactly what each explosion means in structural terms. He sees the torpedo hits and calculates the flood volumes. He watches West Virginia settle and notes that she is settling upright, which means her internal bulkheads are doing their job even as her outer hull is destroyed. He sees Oklahoma capsize and understands immediately that the shallow depth means the wreck is accessible. His mind is already working the problem before the last Japanese aircraft clears Hawaiian airspace. On January 9, 1942, 33 days after the attack, the United States Navy officially creates the Pearl Harbor Salvage Division and places Homer Wallin in command. His orders are direct and brutal in their simplicity. Rescue any trapped personnel still alive, assess damage to each vessel, and return as many ships as possible to combat service. The first objective is heartbreaking. Inside Oklahoma, rescue teams cut through the overturned hull and pull 32 living men from air pockets, where they have survived, for more than 30 hours. But most of the men trapped inside the sunken ships are beyond saving. Wallin and his divers spend weeks in flooded compartments recovering remains with the dignity the fallen deserve. The second objective reveals something extraordinary. Actual damage, when assessed by trained engineers with diving equipment and engineering knowledge, proves significantly different from what aerial photographs show. Surface destruction looks total. Structural reality is more complicated. West Virginia, hit by 7 torpedoes, appears in photographs to be unsalvageable. But she settled upright. Her interior compartments, while flooded, are largely intact. Her main machinery, while submerged, is potentially repairable. Her armament, while inactive, is physically present. The ship that looks dead from above is, in engineering terms, a patient in critical condition rather than a corpse. The third objective is where Wallin's career has secretly been preparing him his entire life. Nevada proves first. Hit by 1 torpedo forward and 6 bombs, she lies beached at Hospital Point with significant flooding throughout her forward sections. Salvage teams seal the torpedo damage with timber framing and concrete patches mixed and poured underwater, using a technique called the Treme process, where wet concrete is delivered through pipes directly to the location where it needs to cure. Divers working in zero visibility guide the process entirely by touch. The patches hold. Pumps remove tens of thousands of tons of water. Nevada's list corrects. Her hull rises on February 12, 1942. 67 days after Japanese bombs set her on fire and tore her hull open. USS Nevada refloats under her own buoyancy. She enters dry dock on February 18th. By April, she is steaming toward Puget Sound for full reconstruction. The impossible has happened once. Now Wallin knows it can happen again. California follows, and here the problem multiplies. 2 torpedoes and 2 bombs had sent her to the bottom, but investigation reveals a secondary disaster that turned survivable damage into a sinking. Maintenance work on December 7th had left multiple watertight manhole covers, either removed or improperly secured. When the torpedoes struck and water began flooding it, spread through improperly sealed compartments in cascading waves that overwhelmed the damage control teams trying to stop it. California sank not just because of Japanese weapons. She sank because of an administrative failure compounded by catastrophic timing. Inside her flooded compartments, the salvage teams find not just seawater and oil. They find the remains of 104 crew members. Every compartment must be accessed, cleaned, documented, and cleared before structural repairs can begin. Divers from the Navy's salvage teams make their descents into conditions that no training program adequately prepares any human being for. Navy diver Edward Raymer later describes working inside West Virginia's flooded interior. Zero visibility. Complete darkness at depths where even indirect light cannot penetrate through the thick fuel oil that coats every surface. Hydrogen sulfide gas from decomposing organic matter accumulates in pockets and burns the throat and eyes even through the rubberized canvas diving suit. The equipment itself, copper helmet, lead-weighted belt at 84 pounds, lead-weighted shoes at 36 pounds each, is designed to counteract suit buoyancy underwater. On the surface, the gear is crushing. Submerged, it allows movement through narrow passageways and flooded spaces that no other technology can access. Unexploded ordnance waits in the darkness. Unstable wreckage shifts without warning. The divers work entirely by touch, building mental maps of interior spaces through their fingertips, communicating up the air hose to surface tenders, spending hours in conditions that would break most people in minutes. Across the Pearl Harbor salvage effort, Navy and civilian divers collectively make approximately 5,000 dives, totaling 20,000 man-hours of underwater work. Multiple divers die from toxic gas exposure. Others suffer injuries from collapsing structures and decompression accidents. None of this stops the work. The operation runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, driven by a timeline that admits no delays. West Virginia is the ultimate test. 7 torpedo hits have torn her port side apart across multiple impact points. Her armor belt, specifically designed by naval architects to withstand torpedo attack, has been defeated by sheer volume of hits. The openings in her hull are not simple holes. They are catastrophic structural failures spanning dozens of feet, each jagged-edged wounds that cannot be sealed with simple patches. Wallin's solution is one of the most audacious engineering decisions in American naval history. Pacific Bridge Company, already working on new dry dock construction at Pearl Harbor, receives a contract to build cofferdam structures covering virtually the entire port side, midsection of the battleship. These are not small patches. They are massive wooden and steel frameworks constructed in sections by workers both above and below the waterline, extending from the bottom curve of West Virginia's hull to well above the surface. Once the framework is positioned and sealed against the ship's exterior, workers pour 650 tons of concrete underwater using the Treme process. 650 tons. That is the weight of a fully loaded destroyer escort poured as liquid stone against the shattered side of a sunken battleship curing under 40 feet of Pacific water. If any portion of those coffer dam patches fails during the dewatering operation, West Virginia floods completely within seconds. The pumps cannot compensate for a catastrophic seal failure. The ship will re-sink, possibly capsizing, certainly crushing any salvage workers still inside her interior. Every engineer on the project understands this. They pour the concrete anyway. Through February, March, and April of 1942, as the Pacific War rages across the ocean, these men are trying to save American ships, for the pumps run continuously. Hundreds of thousands of gallons of contaminated water are extracted from West Virginia's compartments. Workers inside the ship clean spaces that haven't been accessible since December. The structural integrity of the cofferdams is monitored continuously every hour of every day and night. The concrete holds. On May 17, 1942, 5 months and 10 days after Japanese torpedo bombers sent her to the bottom, USS West Virginia rises from Pearl Harbor's floor for the first time. Her devastated port side emerges from the water like evidence of something that should be impossible. The patches hold. The pumps have done their work. The ship that Japanese imperial planners calculated would require years to replace, if it could be replaced at all, floats under the Hawaiian sky. By the time West Virginia surfaces, the transformation of Pearl Harbor's battleship fleet from catastrophe to capability is already well underway. Nevada has departed for the West Coast. California is preparing for her own dry docking. The Japanese Navy believed it had destroyed American battleship power in the Pacific for a generation. 5 months later, the Salvage Division has proved that calculation catastrophically wrong. But Wallin knows something that the initial success cannot yet confirm. Raising these ships from the harbor bottom is only the beginning. The real question, the question that will take years and the full weight of American industrial capacity to answer, is whether ships this badly damaged can be not merely restored, but transformed. Can West Virginia, California, Nevada, and the others return to combat as ships more capable than they were on the morning of December 7th? Can the wreckage of Pearl Harbor become something more dangerous than what existed before the attack? Why? Because the Japanese are not done. The Pacific War is not a naval skirmish. It is a total industrial war, and the enemy has been building training and planning for years. The salvaged American battleships will need to face Japanese warships of extraordinary power. They will need fire control systems, armor improvements, and anti-aircraft capabilities that didn't exist when they were originally commissioned. In Part 2, we follow the reconstruction process that turns Pearl Harbor's battle-damaged survivors into something the Japanese High Command never anticipated. American battleships so thoroughly modernized that they carry technological advantages their opponents cannot match, advantages that will matter enormously when the guns finally speak again in the darkness of a Philippine strait, and 5 of these risen ships cross the formation of a Japanese battle line and deliver the final answer to the question of whether Pearl Harbor was a defeat or merely a very long way around to victory. West Virginia is floating. Nevada is gone. California is rising from the mud. 5 months after the most devastating naval attack in American history, Homer Wallin's Salvage Division has done what Tokyo calculated was impossible. The ships are coming back. But raising a battleship from the harbor floor and returning it to combat are 2 entirely different problems. Here is the number that nobody is saying out loud in the spring of 1942. West Virginia needs complete reconstruction, not repairs, not patchwork. Reconstruction. Her port side is a concrete patched ruin. Her interior compartments are corroded, oil-soaked, and structurally compromised. Her fire control systems are obsolete. Her anti-aircraft armament is inadequate. And the Pacific War is not waiting for her. At Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Washington State, the arguments begin before West Virginia's hull clears Hawaiian waters. Commander James Whitfield has overseen battleship reconstruction programs since 1938. He is 53 years old, precise in his opinions, and deeply skeptical of what the Pearl Harbor salvage teams are proposing. When Wallin's engineering recommendations arrive at Puget Sound in the spring of 1942, Whitfield reads them, once sets them down and calls a meeting. "You want to rebuild the fire control system from scratch?" Whitfield says across the conference table, not as a question. "You want to replace the secondary battery. You want to add radar fire control that hasn't been fully proven in combat conditions. And you want to do all of this while simultaneously reconstructing a hull that has 650 tons of underwater concrete holding it together." "Yes," Wallin answers. "The reconstruction schedule is already 18 months. You're asking for 24, maybe more." "I'm asking for ships that can win when they go back into action." Whitfield shakes his head slowly. "The Navy needs battleships now, not better battleships in 2 years. Every month West Virginia sits in dry dock is a month she isn't providing shore bombardment convoy escort or fleet support. The Chief of Naval Operations wants these ships operational, Captain. Not perfect. Operational." The pressure behind Whitfield's position is real. In the spring and summer of 1942, the Pacific War is going badly. The Battle of Coral Sea in May stops the Japanese advance toward Australia, but costs America the carrier Lexington. Midway in June, destroys 4 Japanese fleet carriers and fundamentally shifts the naval balance, but the surface fleet remains stretched dangerously thin. Every warship matters. Every month of delay costs strategic options that admirals don't have to spare. Wallin is told to accelerate the timeline, reduce the scope of modernization, get the ships back to sea. He refuses, not loudly, not dramatically, with engineering data. He walks back into Whitfield's office, carrying a folder of technical assessments, and lays them open on the desk without preamble. "These ships were designed in the 1910s and built in the early 1920s, Wallin says. "Their fire control systems cannot acquire targets in darkness or poor visibility. Japanese battleships and cruisers have demonstrated night combat capability repeatedly in the Solomons campaign. If we return West Virginia and California to the Pacific with their original fire control systems, we are sending crews into engagements they cannot win." He points to the technical specifications for the Mark 8 fire control radar. This system allows a battleship to achieve accurate firing solutions at ranges exceeding 20 miles in complete darkness. If West Virginia carries this system, she doesn't just return to combat, she dominates it. Whitfield stares at the specifications for a long moment. "You have one chance to make this case to Admiral King's staff," he says finally. "One meeting. If they say no, you reduce scope, and we accelerate the schedule. Understood?" Wallin picks up his folder. "Understood." But before that meeting happens, he finds an ally he didn't expect. Rear Admiral Willis Lee commands the battleship forces in the Pacific, and he has personally experienced what happens when American warships meet Japanese opponents at night without adequate radar. At the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal in November 1942, Lee uses his 2 battleships and their radar to defeat a Japanese force in darkness, proving the technology's decisive value. He understands immediately what Wallin is proposing. He understands it in a way that career shipyard administrators cannot, because he has stood on a bridge in the darkness of Iron Bottom Sound and watched radar paint Japanese warships onto a screen, while his gunners found their solution before the enemy knew he was there. And Lee sends a message directly to naval operations supporting full modernization of the Pearl Harbor survivors. His argument is stripped of diplomatic language. "A battleship with inferior fire control," he writes, "is a liability in modern night combat conditions. The enemy has demonstrated repeatedly that darkness is not protection, it is opportunity. We require ships that share this capability, not ships returned to service with 1920s technology because someone wanted them back 3 months earlier." The meeting with Admiral King's staff happens in December 1942. Wallin presents the engineering case. Lee's message is read into the record. The decision comes back within a week. Full modernization is approved for West Virginia, California, and Tennessee. The reconstructions will take as long as they take. The ships that return to the Pacific will not be restored. They will be transformed. Jiao, Puget Sound. Naval Shipyard in January 1943 is operating at a pace that peacetime naval planning never anticipated. Workers are running 3 shifts around the clock. The dry docks are occupied continuously. Steel machinery, electrical systems, and specialized equipment move through the facility in volumes that would have seemed impossible 18 months earlier. West Virginia's Reconstruction begins with the most fundamental question: how do you rebuild a ship whose structural integrity you cannot fully trust? Her hull has been refloated and dry docked. The concrete cofferdams remove the actual torpedo damage exposed. What the engineers find when they inspect the bare metal confirms their worst estimates and exceeds them in several places. The torpedo hits didn't just open holes in the hull. They deformed the internal structure across multiple frames, compromising the geometric integrity that keeps a warship's components in alignment. Before anything else can be rebuilt, the structure itself must be corrected. Workers heat damaged frames with acetylene torches and use hydraulic jacks to push them back toward their original positions. Steel plates are cut away and replaced. Structural members that X-ray examination shows to be cracked internally are removed and renewed. The process is slow, precise, and critical because everything that goes on top of this structure, turrets weighing hundreds of tons, gun mounts, machinery, armor, depends on the frame beneath being exactly where it is supposed to be. The new fire control systems arrive from the manufacturer in components and are assembled by technicians who are learning the equipment at the same pace they are installing it. The Mark 8 fire control radar is not simple technology. It requires trained operators who understand both the equipment's capabilities and its limitations. It requires integration with the gun turrets, the plotting rooms, and the command spaces in ways that demand rewiring significant portions of the ship's electrical system. The technicians work around the structural crews and the hull platers and the machinery installers in a choreography of overlapping trades that the shipyard foremen manage with a precision that is itself a kind of engineering. By the spring of 1943, West Virginia is beginning to look like a warship again rather than a construction project. Her new secondary battery of anti-aircraft weapons is taking shape along her sides. Her superstructure significantly redesigned to reduce top weight and improve stability rises in a cleaner profile than the original. Her fire control systems are integrated and beginning their testing sequences. California reaches the same point 3 months later. Tennessee, less severely damaged at Pearl Harbor, completes her modernization faster and returns to combat service in May 1943, the first Pearl Harbor survivor to rejoin the Pacific Fleet with full modernization. The commanders who receive Tennessee in the Pacific do not receive the ship that Japan attacked. Her secondary armament has been completely replaced with modern anti-aircraft weapons capable of engaging the fast aircraft that have made older anti-aircraft systems obsolete. Her fire control systems include the latest radar technology. Her hull has been modified to improve her stability and her torpedo defense characteristics. The Japanese Navy has spent 18 months fighting a version of American naval power frozen in 1941. Tennessee represents something different. She represents what American industrial reconstruction can do when it decides to improve rather than merely restore. The problem that emerges in the summer of 1943 is not technical, it is human. Fleet commanders who have built their tactical doctrine around the capabilities of their existing ships look at the modernized Pearl Harbor survivors and reach for familiar procedures. Tennessee arrives in the Aleutians Campaign with a fire control radar system capable of acquiring targets in fog and darkness at ranges exceeding 20 miles. The operations officers write engagement plans that keep her inside 10 miles because that is the range at which their existing procedures were written. Wallin hears about this and does something that captains with political instincts would not do. He travels to the forward areas and sits down with fleet staff officers and walks them through engagement geometry until they understand what they have. The conversations are not comfortable. "Your radar can see the target," he tells one planning group. Your guns can reach the target. Your fire control computer can solve the problem. The only thing preventing you from engaging at maximum effective range is that your doctrine was written for ships that couldn't do this. The results begin accumulating in the records. Ships using modern radar fire control in nighttime engagements achieve hit rates that older fire control methods cannot match. The mathematics of combat effectiveness shift. Gradually, then decisively, fleet doctrine catches up to fleet capability. By late 1943, the Pearl Harbor survivors are operating as what Wallin always argued they could become: not repaired relics, not restored antiques. Weapons, modernized beyond their original specifications, carrying capabilities that the Japanese Navy does not know they possess. Tokyo has not adjusted its calculations. Japanese naval planners still model American battleship capability based on what reconnaissance showed in the 1930s and early 1940s. They know the Pearl Harbor ships were salvaged. They do not know what those ships became during Reconstruction. The intelligence failure is not a small one. It is the kind of failure that creates catastrophic surprises. And in October 1944, the opportunity for that surprise arrives. Japanese Admiral Nishimura leads a force of battleships and cruisers north through Surigao Strait toward the American fleet supporting the Philippine landings. 6 American battleships wait at the strait's northern exit. 5 of them are Pearl Harbor survivors. What Nishimura does not know, what his intelligence has not told him, what Tokyo has not calculated. West Virginia can see his fleet on radar from 21 miles away, in complete darkness, with a firing solution already computed and verified. In Part 3, the guns speak. The ships that Japan sank at Pearl Harbor cross the formation of an enemy battle line in the war's final battleship engagement and deliver their answer to December 7th at 2,000 feet per second. But first, one of the salvaged battleships is hit by a weapon Japan has introduced that no amount of armor or fire control radar can reliably stop, and the question of whether these reconstructed ships can survive the Pacific War's most desperate phase is suddenly, violently open again. 5 salvaged battleships. 24 months of reconstruction. Fire control technology the Japanese Navy doesn't know exists. That is where Part 2 left us. West Virginia, California, Tennessee, Maryland, and Pennsylvania have returned to the Pacific, not as restored relics, but as modernized weapons. Admiral Nishimura's force is steaming north through Surigao Strait. He believes he understands what he is sailing toward. He is catastrophically wrong. But before the guns speak, Tokyo has been doing its own mathematics, and the numbers are alarming them. By mid-1944, Japanese naval intelligence has noticed something wrong with their casualty calculations. American surface ships are achieving gunnery hits at ranges and in visibility conditions that their pre-war assessments said were impossible. At Kolombangara in July 1943, American cruisers and destroyers engage Japanese forces in darkness at ranges where pre-radar fire control should produce near-zero accuracy. The hit rates don't match the models. At Empress Augusta Bay in November 1943, the same pattern repeats. Japanese forces take accurate fire from American ships that should not be able to see them. The intelligence reports accumulate on desks in Tokyo, and the conclusion that emerges from them is deeply uncomfortable. The Americans have radar-guided fire control on their surface combatants, not experimental equipment, operational systems, integrated into their gunnery, working in darkness. Vice Admiral Shoji Nishimura reads these assessments in the summer of 1944 and requests updated intelligence on the Pearl Harbor survivors specifically. The report he receives tells him the salvaged battleships have been reconstructed at American West Coast yards. It does not tell him what those reconstructions included. Japanese intelligence has photographs of the ships entering and leaving Puget Sound. It does not have technical specifications for the Mark 8 fire control radar that West Virginia now carries. Nishimura plans his approach to Surigao Strait, assuming he faces opponents with capabilities similar to 1941. He knows the Americans will have radar. He does not know their radar can hand a firing solution to 16-inch guns at 21 miles in complete darkness. With accuracy, his own optical fire control cannot match at 8 miles in daylight. This gap between what he believes and what is true will cost him everything. Japanese shipyards in 1944 are running at capacity with deteriorating resources. 4 fleet carriers lost at Midway. 2 more lost at Philippine Sea in June 1944. Experienced aircrew dead in numbers that training programs cannot replace. The industrial equation that Yamamoto warned about in 1941 has arrived on schedule and is worse than his most pessimistic projections. Japan built for a short war. America built for a long one. The difference is now visible in every operational theater simultaneously. But the kamikazes are coming, and they change the problem in ways that radar and fire control cannot fully solve. In the fall of 1944, as the Pearl Harbor survivors prepare for operations in the Philippines, Japanese Naval Command makes a decision born from desperation that is also tactically creative. Conventional air attack against American warships with their dense radar-directed anti-aircraft fire is producing unsustainable aircraft and pilot losses for insufficient damage. The solution they implement is to make the aircraft itself the weapon. A pilot who aims his aircraft at the target doesn't need to survive the attack. He needs to aim accurately once. Maryland is hit by a kamikaze on November 29, 1944. 31 Americans are killed. 30 are wounded. The damage is significant but not fatal. Maryland remains operational. The attack demonstrates both the kamikaze's effectiveness and its limitation. It can damage a battleship. It cannot sink one with a single hit. But it can kill the men inside, and it can remove a ship from operations during the weeks required to repair structural damage. Against the landing operations, the American fleet is supporting throughout the Philippines campaign. Even temporary removal of fire support ships has consequences for the soldiers and Marines going ashore. Pennsylvania is hit at Okinawa. West Virginia takes a kamikaze on April 1, 1945. 4 killed. Minor structural damage. She remains in the gun line. The salvaged battleships absorb punishment that would have sunk them in their original configurations and keep fighting. Their reconstruction included improved compartmentalization and damage control systems that the original 1920s designs didn't have. They are harder to kill than they look. But the question of whether any of this reconstruction was worth it, whether the decision to modernize rather than merely restore, was correct, that question gets its definitive answer on the night of October 24 to 25, 1944, in a strait between 2 Philippine islands. October 24, 1944, 2300 hours, Surigao Strait, Philippines. Rear Admiral Jesse Oldendorf has known for hours that Nishimura is coming. American PT boats have been tracking the Japanese southern force since it entered the strait at dusk. Destroyer torpedo attacks have already savaged the formation. Battleship Fuso is dead in the water, burning, sinking with over 1,000 men aboard. Nishimura presses north with Yamashiro cruiser Mogami and 4 destroyers. He knows he has been hit. He does not know what is waiting at the strait's northern exit. Oldendorf's battle line runs east to west across the strait mouth. 6 battleships: West Virginia, Maryland, Mississippi, Tennessee, California, Pennsylvania. 5 of them were on Battleship Row on December 7, 1941. His cruisers and their remaining destroyers hold positions covering the flanks. The formation is textbook. The geometry is perfect. It is the crossing of the T that naval tacticians have studied for a century, the maneuver that allows one fleet to fire full broadsides, while the opposing force can only return fire with its forward guns. 0351 hours. West Virginia's radar paints Yamashiro at 42,800 yards, 21 miles, complete darkness. No moon. The fire control computer running the Mark 8 system has already been working the problem for several minutes. It is tracking Yamashiro's speed course and distance, simultaneously calculating where the ship will be when shells fired now arrive at their target. The mathematics are continuous updated with every radar sweep, producing a firing solution that optical systems cannot replicate under any conditions. 0353 hours. West Virginia opens fire. 8 16-inch guns. Each shell weighs 2,700 pounds. Muzzle velocity exceeding 2,000 feet per second. The firing sequence takes less than 4 seconds from electrical trigger to guns firing. The recoil pushes 33,000 tons of battleship sideways in the water. Muzzle blast compresses the air hard enough to pop rivets from nearby bulkheads and squeeze breath from the lungs of anyone standing exposed on deck. Yamashiro is 21 miles away. The shells are in the air for nearly a minute. They hit. 0355 hours. Tennessee and California open fire. Their 14-inch guns add to the bombardment, reaching Yamashiro from the darkness she cannot see into. She fires back. Her shells fall into empty water because her optical rangefinders cannot find targets that are showing no lights in air that is dark and smoky. She is firing blind at ships that can see her precisely. Maryland ranges off West Virginia's shell splashes and begins firing at 0359. Her older Mark III radar cannot independently acquire the target, but West Virginia's impact flashes give her a reference point. She fires 6 salvos of 16-inch shells. 0401 hours. Yamashiro is burning along her entire length. She has taken multiple 16-inch hits below her main deck. Her machinery spaces are flooding. Her speed drops from 18 knots to 12, then to 8. She continues firing. The fire control crews aboard her are doing everything their training requires. It is not enough because they cannot see what they are fighting. 409 hours. Admiral Oldendorf orders ceasefire. American cruisers are in the gun line's field of fire. A shell from one of his own battleships risks hitting a friendly ship if the barrage continues without adjustment. The pause lasts minutes. Yamashiro continues north, burning listing. She turns south. She is trying to withdraw. It is too late. She sinks at approximately 0419. Admiral Nishimura goes down with her. Most of her crew dies in the water of Surigao Strait. Mogami, hit heavily by cruiser fire, withdraws south and is sunk by American aircraft the next morning. The engagement statistics are stark in their precision. West Virginia fires 93 rounds of 16-inch armor-piercing ammunition. Tennessee fires 69 rounds of 14-inch. California fires 63 rounds. Maryland fires 48 rounds. Mississippi manages 1 salvo. Pennsylvania never acquires a target. The entire engagement from West Virginia's first shot to the ceasefire order runs approximately 18 minutes. 18 minutes. The Japanese Southern Force ceases to exist in 18 minutes. Inside West Virginia's plotting room after the ceasefire, a junior fire control officer named Lieutenant Commander Howard Cady writes a single line in his action report. All targets engaged were destroyed or driven off. No American ships suffered gunnery damage. West Virginia fired 93 rounds. Fire control analysis conducted after the battle estimates she achieved a hit rate exceeding 40% against a moving target at ranges between 15 and 21 miles in darkness. Pre-radar fire control doctrine considered 5% against stationary targets at 12 miles in daylight to be acceptable performance. The technology Wallin argued for over Commander Whitfield's objections in 1942 has validated itself completely. News of Surigao Strait reaches Pearl Harbor, reaches Washington, reaches the shipyards at Puget Sound and Mare Island, and reaches the families of the men who worked in flooded compartments for 20,000 hours to raise these ships from the harbor bottom. The symbolism is specific and powerful. The ships Japan sank crossed the T against a Japanese battle line and destroyed it. The tactical response to December 7th has arrived, delayed by 3 years and delivered at 2,000 feet per second. Fleet-wide assessments conducted after Surigao Strait accelerate the modernization of every American surface combatant scheduled for refit. The Mark 8 fire control radar becomes standard equipment across the battleship fleet. Night combat doctrine is rewritten to incorporate engagement ranges that old fire control made impossible. The lessons Wallin embedded in West Virginia's Reconstruction propagate outward through the entire surface navy in the final year of the war. Japanese surface forces do not again attempt a major fleet engagement against American battleships. The combination of radar fire control and American industrial output has made the outcome of such engagements too predictable. Japanese naval strategy in 1945 concentrates on kamikazes, submarines, and the defense of the home islands. The era of battleship against battleship combat ends at Surigao Strait, concluded by 5 ships that Japan sank 3 years earlier. The Pearl Harbor survivors continue operating through the end of the war. Nevada bombards Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Tennessee participates in 11 major operations total. California supports the Lingayen Gulf landings and Okinawa. West Virginia's guns fall silent for the last time on September 2, 1945, when she anchors in Tokyo Bay for the formal surrender ceremony. The battleship that Japanese torpedoes sent to Pearl Harbor's bottom is present when Japan admits the war is over. Admiral Wallin, promoted through the war years for his salvage work, reflects on the outcome in his memoirs with characteristic understatement. The effort invested in raising and modernizing the Pearl Harbor ships, he writes, returned value beyond what any planning estimate had calculated. Beyond what any planning estimate had calculated. In those 9 words is the complete story of 20,000 man-hours underwater, 650 tons of concrete poured against a shattered battleship's side, and technical arguments won against institutional resistance because the engineering was right, and the stakes were total. But here is what most histories don't examine. What happened to the men who did the work nobody saw? The divers who made 5,000 descents into toxic darkness. The workers who poured concrete underwater. The engineers who chose modernization over speed when the easy choice was to accept less and deliver faster. Their story doesn't end at Surigao Strait. In Part 4, we examine what Pearl Harbor's salvage operation left behind beyond the ships, the doctrine it created, the industrial philosophy it proved, the decisions it forced that shaped every American military program that followed it, and the quiet final chapter of Homer Wallin's career, which contains a lesson about institutional memory that the American military learned, then forgot, then paid to relearn. The story of Pearl Harbor's Ghost Fleet has one more chapter, and almost nobody knows it. Knows. From a shallow harbor that should have been a graveyard, 5 dead battleships rose. From 20,000 hours of blind diving and toxic darkness, a fleet was reborn. From one naval architect's refusal to accept permanent as an answer, the Pacific War's final battleship engagement ended in 18 minutes with the ships Japan sank crossing the T against a Japanese battle line and destroying it. Parts 1 through 3 brought us from December 7, 1941, to Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945. But the story left one question open. What happened to Homer Wallin when the guns went silent? Most people assume the men behind historic victories receive proportional recognition, parades, promotions, their names attached to the achievements they made possible. The reality of what happened to the Pearl Harbor Salvage Division's commander is more complicated, more human, and ultimately more instructive than any medal ceremony. When Japan signed the surrender documents aboard Missouri in Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945, Homer Wallin was 54 years old. He had spent 4 years executing the most successful naval salvage operation in history. He had raised ships that every conventional assessment said were beyond recovery. He had argued for modernization over speed against institutional resistance and been proven correct at Surigao Strait. He had sent 18 ships back to a war that needed them and watched 5 of those ships deliver the Pacific Fleet's answer to Pearl Harbor in the darkness of a Philippine strait. He returned to Washington and wrote his reports. There was no parade. There was no single moment of public recognition proportional to what the Salvage Division accomplished. The Navy awarded Wallin the Distinguished Service Medal, whose citation used the phrase "success beyond expectation" to describe results that had fundamentally altered the Pacific War's trajectory. He was promoted to vice admiral. He continued working in naval engineering roles through the late 1940s and into the 1950s, the kind of career continuation that represents institutional respect without cultural memory. He retired in 1955 after 35 years of naval service. He returned to civilian life in the Pacific Northwest, the same region where Puget Sound Naval Shipyard had rebuilt the ships he raised from Pearl Harbor's bottom. He was 73 years old when he died in 1984, 43 years after standing on a flagship's deck, watching Arizona burn and calculating cofferdam sizes. In his retirement years, Wallin wrote a technical memoir titled Pearl Harbor: Why, How, Fleet Salvage, and Final Appraisal. It was published by the Naval History Division in 1968. It sold modestly. It was read primarily by naval historians and engineering professionals. The man who saved 18 ships from permanent loss spent his final decades known mainly to specialists, his name absent from the popular histories that remembered Pearl Harbor's attack in detail while giving cursory attention to the recovery that followed. Commander Whitfield, who had argued for accelerated Reconstruction over full modernization, retired in 1946. The officers who received the modernized Pearl Harbor survivors in the Pacific and initially used them within old doctrine eventually updated their procedures. The institutional arguments that Wallin won through engineering data, rather than rank or politics, left no lasting enemies. The Navy's memory of the salvage operation was respectful but not vivid. But here is the thing about legacy that medal ceremonies and retirement ceremonies cannot capture. Wallin's real inheritance wasn't in what the Navy formally recognized. It was in what the salvage operation demonstrated about the relationship between industrial capacity and military power. A demonstration so complete and so thoroughly proven that it changed how American planners thought about destruction itself. The technical legacy of Pearl Harbor's salvage extends in directions that the 1942 engineering teams could not have anticipated. The TREMI process for underwater concrete placement refined during West Virginia's Coffer Dam construction became standard methodology for underwater civil engineering projects, including bridge foundations, harbor construction, and offshore platform installation throughout the post-war decades. The diving procedures developed and improved during 20,000 hours of salvage work contributed directly to the Navy's post-war deep-sea diving programs and to the commercial diving industry that emerged in the 1950s and 1960s to support offshore oil exploration. Techniques that divers used to navigate inside flooded warship compartments by touch alone became foundational training for subsequent generations of military and commercial divers working in zero-visibility conditions. The Mark 8 fire control radar, whose installation Wallin fought to include in the Pearl Harbor Reconstruction program, remained the primary American battleship fire control system through the Korean War. When American battleships provided shore bombardment support at Incheon in 1950 and along the Korean coast through 1953, they used direct descendants of the technology that West Virginia carried into Surigao Strait. The principle that radar-guided fire control at extended ranges in all weather conditions represented a decisive tactical advantage shaped American naval weapons development through the entire Cold War period and into the precision-guided munitions era that defines modern naval combat. The industrial philosophy that the salvage operation demonstrated that destroyed equipment is recoverable if industrial capacity and engineering knowledge are applied quickly and comprehensively, influenced American military logistics doctrine for decades afterward. The Korean War saw systematic battlefield equipment recovery programs operating on principles derived from Pearl Harbor experience. The Vietnam War's extensive helicopter recovery operations, pulling damaged aircraft from the field for repair and return to service, rather than abandoning them, reflected the same fundamental approach. Modern American military logistics doctrine explicitly values equipment recovery and repair as force multiplication, a lesson embedded in operational planning through institutional memory that traces directly to what Wallin's division proved in 1942. 18 nations studied the Pearl Harbor salvage operation in detail through the post-war decades, incorporating its methods into their own naval damage control and salvage doctrines. The Soviet Navy, planning for potential conflict in shallow coastal waters around Europe and Asia, developed salvage capabilities modeled partly on American techniques refined at Pearl Harbor. The practical knowledge that divers and engineers accumulated during the Pearl Harbor recovery became a shared inheritance of modern naval salvage practice worldwide. The deeper lesson the salvage operation teaches is not technical. The technical details, coffer dam construction, Tremie concrete radar, integration, are the surface of something more fundamental about how institutions respond to catastrophic failure. When the Pearl Harbor attack happened, two responses were available. The first was to accept the destruction as permanent and rebuild from zero, ordering new construction to replace what was lost. The second was to reject permanent as a category and invest in recovery of what existed. Wallin chose the second path instinctively, because his engineering mind calculated that the harbor's shallow water made recovery possible, and his experience told him that recovery would be faster and cheaper than replacement. What the institutional resistance he faced reveals is equally important. Commander Whitfield's argument for accelerated reconstruction over full modernization was not stupid. It was rational within the framework of assumptions available in 1942. Those assumptions said that speed mattered more than capability, that getting ships back to sea quickly was more valuable than taking additional time to make them better. Wallin's counter-argument required believing that the extra time invested in modernization would return more combat value than the earlier delivery date of a less capable ship. He was right. But he was right in a way that couldn't be proven until Surigao Strait, 2 years after the argument was made. Institutional resistance to innovation is frequently resistance to unproven claims, which means that the courage required to push innovation forward is specifically the courage to insist on something before the proof exists. Wallin had that courage. Most people in most institutions do not. The same dynamic has appeared throughout military history and continues appearing in every organization that faces the choice between comfortable certainty and uncomfortable innovation. The American military's development of precision-guided munitions in the 1970s faced institutional resistance from officers who believed unguided bombs delivered in sufficient quantity achieved adequate results. The development of network-centric warfare in the 1990s faced resistance from commanders who trusted their own judgment over networked sensor data. In each case, the innovation eventually won because events provided the proof that arguments could not. The lesson Pearl Harbor teaches is that waiting for events to provide proof is expensive. The proof at Surigao Strait cost lives in the Pacific that better-equipped ships might have saved earlier in the war. Now, here is the detail that almost no account of the Pearl Harbor salvage operation includes the piece of the story that most historians mention briefly, if at all, and that changes the meaning of everything that came before it. On September 2, 1945, USS West Virginia anchors in Tokyo Bay for Japan's formal surrender ceremony. She is one of the warships present for the signing aboard Missouri. Her crew watches the ceremony. Her guns, which fired 93 16-inch rounds at Surigao Strait 11 months earlier, are silent. The ship that Japanese torpedoes sank in 40 feet of water on December 7, 1941, is present at the moment Japan acknowledges the war is over. West Virginia is decommissioned on January 9, 1947. The date is not random. January 9, 1947 is exactly 5 years after Homer Wallin took command of the Pearl Harbor Salvage Division on January 9, 1942. Whether the decommissioning date was chosen deliberately or arrived there by administrative coincidence is not recorded in available documentation, but the symmetry is exact. 5 years to the day from the moment Wallin accepted responsibility for raising the dead fleet to the moment West Virginia was formally retired from service. She was sold for scrapping in 1959. The steel that Japanese torpedoes tried to send to permanent ruin was melted down and became something else. That is perhaps the most complete expression of the industrial philosophy that the salvage operation embodied. Nothing is permanently destroyed. matter changes form. The question is always, who controls the transformation? Then from a naval architect with engineering blueprints and a willingness to argue with admirals to 18 ships, returned to combat from the harbor bottom to the Pacific War's final battleship engagement, decided by radar technology installed over institutional objection to a decommissioning date that landed exactly 5 years from the moment the salvage work began. Homer Wallin proved that destruction is not a permanent category when industrial capacity and human determination choose to treat it as temporary. The Pearl Harbor salvage operation rescued 18 ships, returned them modernized and improved, and delivered through those ships a combined combat contribution across every major Pacific operation from 1942 to 1945 that no post-attack planning estimate had calculated was possible. That is what engineering courage looks like when the stakes are a world war. If you know a story like this one, a moment when someone refused to accept impossible as an answer and changed history because of that refusal, leave it in the comments. These stories exist in every theater of every conflict, waiting for someone to excavate them from the technical reports and engineering memoirs where they are buried. Subscribe if you want to find more of them together. The ships the Japanese Navy sank came back. They came back better than before. And that is the only answer that has ever needed to be given to anyone who believed that what America built could be permanently destroyed.